Okay, so I am just about ready to get started. I sent out the link a little late, so I was just going to give it a couple minutes to see if anybody else was going to come and join. And I'm opening up my notes also. We had an extra week of swim practice added to our season, surprise. So I was at the beach again today and got back just a little bit later than I had planned. So I am trying to get this meeting together. I'm hoping that all of you got to watch class 2, which is posted in the group. If you didn't, please go back and find the link. And then this, when I finish, will be posted in the group too, so that you can come if you weren't available at this time, so you can do the class. And if anybody has any questions, please be sure to post them. This way I can answer them. So the last class we talked about reasons to homeschool and finding your why, which is what's going to keep you homeschooling. And those are two really big decisions in your homeschool. And one thing that I didn't realize when I started, now a decade into doing this, was that there's so many different kinds, not kinds, I guess I should say, so many different styles of homeschooling. I thought that, you know, it's kind of like public school, private school, homeschool. Well, it could be different. But it goes beyond that. And it isn't just a different place to have school. It really, there are different schools of thought on how to run your homeschool, how curriculum works, how your schedule works, how your life works. And I found that for a long time I was chasing the latest and greatest and what was out there and what everybody said would work best. And some of it did work best, and some of it is amazing. It just didn't work right for my family. But I found that once I had found the styles that worked for our family, it was just like a light bulb went off and everything worked so much better. And I wish that I had, in the beginning, known about this, because even as an education major, many of these philosophies I'd never heard of. So we're going to slowly go through these and talk about them a little bit. And then I'm going to post later tonight a workbook for you to go through. I hope that you work through workbook 1 so that you can evaluate the different methods and look into some of them, see which one works for you. You may have to try it out with your family to see if it really works, but I think that just in going through these and knowing more about them can help you evaluate if it's going to be something that is going to be better for your family or not. So the first one is considered textbook learning, basically what we would consider school at home. There are people who just move their schoolroom from the school to their house, and they use regular textbooks that you would use in school. They use regular lesson plans and assessments, and it's just school, but in a smaller framework. I don't know many homeschoolers that don't use any textbooks at all. There are textbooks that are designed specifically for homeschooling. So this, even if you're not looking to do school at home, textbook learning is something that is a viable option, and there are some subjects, like for instance math, I like to have a textbook, where you're going to need it no matter what subject you're in. It just depends on how you're going to use it. So textbook learning basically is that it would be run just like a school is run. You would have a set schedule, so there'd be like 30 minutes for each class. They would be done in a certain order, and you follow the lesson plans, the assessments, and everything that is in the packet of textbooks. So you would buy a big box of textbooks, it's called a box curriculum a lot of the time, and it comes with all of your material. Generally, textbook learning users use one set curriculum, like BJU or Seton, Colby, trying to think of some of the other big ones. But anyway, it comes in a big box, and you order your grade level, and everything is the same grade level. Now, there is another way to do textbook learning, though, is that you use textbooks, but you custom design which ones you use. So you pull this math program from, let's say, Saxon. You pull your language from Sunlight, and you pull science from BJU, and you put together the best of everything. But you still run it as a school would be run, where you have set homework and assessments and standardized way of doing it. So for some people that works, for some families that really works great. For homeschooling, sometimes it doesn't work because it's if you're looking to have a classroom in a school, it's different at home. So that's just something to be aware of. The next one is the Moore formula, and this was founded by a man named Moore, and he took he took some of his different philosophies and put it together to come up with how he thought people should be educated, and it is a pretty popular method for homeschooling, although it was one that I just learned about recently. Raymond and Dorothy Moore were considered the grandparents of homeschooling movement. They started this way back, always something going on, way back before homeschooling was even known by a lot of people. And their philosophy, the main push of their philosophy was school can wait. There are some people who still do this, but it was more popular before homeschooling became mainstream and you could get materials, and also there were a lot of areas that homeschooling still wasn't allowed. Now it is allowed, as we discussed in all the 50 states and all the provinces of Canada, and then about 50% of the rest of the world. So this was back before it was accepted everywhere, and before it was easy to, or even possible to get any kind of supplies. And so their idea was school can wait. They saw children being pushed into school at 4 or 5 years old, and they felt that they really should be starting it later. They should have those years to just enjoy being children. And so there are many people that consider themselves homeschooling, but what they did was they homeschooled until the child was, let's say, 8, 9, or 10, and then put them into regular school. So that was the first premise of their education. School can wait. There are people, though, that do homeschool for all grades that still follow the Moore formula. And so they believe that formal education should not start for children until at least 8, possibly as late as 12, depending on where they are in their development. So the Moore formula asks parents to allow children before then, so up until between 8 and 12, to just have a lot of time for play, to spend time reading and singing and doing educational things, but not having any kind of formal class. There's no assessments, there's no tests, there's no lesson plans. It's more just being exposed to the different areas and enjoying being a child. The formula does use some textbooks, but they're just for private study and usually used later on. And what it boasts most is that it is low stress, low cost, and easy to implement. So once you get into the Moore philosophy, they do have their own books that they use. But delayed academics is not exclusive just to the Moore method. But after then, it is a set way of educating that is not quite so rigid and is very family-based and very open for them to explore their likes and have plenty of downtime to pursue hobbies and to also get to burn off some steam and play. Okay, what we run in the next one that we're going to talk about is unschooling. And this philosophy is very misunderstood, but it's also very broad. So I'm going to try to summarize this, but you have to realize that there are people that unschool that fall into a great myriad of variations on this. So basically, unschooling goes from that there is no formal teaching at all. There are no textbooks, there's no classes, there's no curriculum. Life is a curriculum, and children just learn through living and by information you pass down. So they learn their numbers by cooking with mom. They learn how to read just by being around books. They learn about science by being in the garden and taking hikes. So that's the one end of homeschooling, that the children are just left to learn at their own pace, to learn how they want, and to just learn from the world around them. On the other end of homeschooling is a philosophy that it's child-led, and also it doesn't use textbooks necessarily, but if it does use textbooks, it's all at the child's own pace, and there is not a rigid schedule. Unschooling can be done in a more structured way, that you allow the child to develop at their own pace, and you take lots of time to explore and learn from what's around you. But it can also be done, as I said, where the child just learns as they grow. And obviously they do learn, because even before children go to school, they learn many things. They don't need to be in a classroom to learn. So that is one of the biggest tenets of unschooling, is that you don't have to be sitting at a desk, you don't have to be in a classroom, you don't have to have a textbook, you don't have a curriculum to learn. That learning is what happens, in education and school are not the same thing. Many years ago, homeschooling in general was considered unschooling because you were not in school. So that term has kind of evolved and changed, and that is why it has such a broad definition, because originally all homeschoolers were considered unschoolers no matter how you were doing it. But at this point, unschooling has become its own faction, homeschooling realm. And if you're more interested in it, there are many groups, especially on Facebook, that you can get to learn more about it. It's by far the most flexible option, because there are no rigid standards, and you basically create it yourself based on what you think your children need. So the next one is classical education, and this is something that probably, aside from textbook learning, would be the most familiar to those that went to school. Classical education is rooted in old Socrates method, the trivium, teaching the different stages in the classical subjects. So reading, literature, math, science, social studies, civics, ancient languages. Latin is very popular in classical education, and there are generally little to no textbooks. Everything is taught either from a classical textbook or from living books. The living books are a big part of classical education. Much of the classical education, though, has grown into a textbook industry, and so you can get a classical education textbook if you are looking for it. But the main premise of this philosophy is that you give the children at the grammar stage information for them to memorize. Memorization is a very large part of classical education, so as well as dialogue and conversation. And then they move into this middle phase where they start to learn more about what they memorize. So down here, they're just memorizing the facts like in 1492, Columbus sailed to America, or in 1776, the American Revolution started after the Declaration of Independence. So they're learning all these facts, and they're being exposed to great literature, probably Latin, and the arts. When you move into the next phase, now they are learning more substance about each of those facts and beginning to be able to have a dialogue about that. And eventually you move to, that's called the rhetoric phase, and eventually you move on to where you're able to debate it, and you can have conversations and understand the philosophy and really delve deeply into what you just knew as a child. Now you can make your own and have discussions, which again was based on the Socratic method of question and answer and being able to discuss. So that is the classic education method. It is gaining popularity. I think a lot of people like to go back to the way education was done before it became a formal mandatory school, and look at how it was done back then. It has a lot of flexibility in it, but it is something that some people really like the classics and Latin, and some people do not. Spinning off from that is the Charlotte Mason homeschool philosophy, which Charlotte Mason was an educational philosopher that was contemporary to Maria Montessori, who we'll speak about later, around the turn of the 19th or 20th century. And she believed heavily in classical education, but not just classical education. One of the biggest tenets of her philosophy is that children need to be outside as much as possible. In fact, she advocated up to 7 hours a day for children that were either preschool age, which her schooling began at about 8 years old, similar to the Morton method. And even after schooling began, to have a great deal of time outside, exploring, stretching themselves physically, and learning about nature. That was the greatest teacher that children could have. And so even in the teenage years, she advocated hours outside, doing nature walks, doing nature studies, running around, exercising, and getting fresh air. On the other big tenet of Charlotte Mason homeschool is using living books, which some classical education uses living books, some of them use textbooks. Charlotte Mason is all living books. The living book is something that could be fiction or nonfiction, but it has value aside from the story. So there are fiction books like historical fiction, or even some mysteries that are, if you look at Sherlock Holmes, that teach morals, or are classic literature that is important to understand, to interact in society. So all of these books have value that when you read them, you learn something from them. So there's living books, and then there's what they call twaddle. And twaddle are books that may be fun, but aren't teaching you anything, and could be a little bit on the crass side sometimes, but generally they're books that you would not consider to be an educational book. So Charlotte Mason has a breadth of literature that is used. Generally the classics, it tends to be older books that help to bolster the education and is built on the classical model. So the arts, penmanship, the 4 R's, reading, writing, religion, and arithmetic, and also the classical languages are what is stressed in Charlotte Mason. And I hear my kids coming, so this could get noisy a little bit. Hello, Cecilia. Contemporary to Charlotte Mason was Maria Montessori, who was also another educational philosopher. She, like Charlotte Mason, really wanted to invest in what was best for the children and look for a different method to help children learn other than just doing like a factory-based education. So the Montessori method is child-led. It's completely child-led. There are what they call albums that are used to have different activities. but it is not like a standard-based education. It is not a textbook-based education. There are different methods and materials that are used, and a lot of it is hands-on, and it stresses practical life. So learning how to, at a very young age, how to clean, how to cook, how to take care of yourself, how to take care of a pet, how to garden, using child-sized tools. This way they can do their own work, which play is considered work in Montessori. That's the work of children. But also that they can work to contribute to their family and work to contribute to society. And that helps to increase their abilities and their knowledge, and gives them the confidence to go through life. Montessori saw each child as a very beautiful gift, and she wanted to nurture that gift and keep their own special uniqueness without grinding that down by saying, you must learn this now, you must learn that now. So the Montessori approach is very hands-on. It's very flexible, and it also advocates waiting to educate until the child is ready. So while some of them advocate waiting and have a certain age, Montessori advocates waiting until the child is ready for everything and allowing them to show you what they need to learn instead of you telling them what they need to learn. Montessori does not have to be very expensive. I know that it has become synonymous with wooden toys that cost hundreds of dollars. And while those are lovely and I drool over many of them, I wish I could have all of them, that is not the core of Montessori. If you want to know more, there are several. I'm going to put some links in the group to websites about homeschooling the Montessori way, because it isn't just about the wooden toys and the child-sized tools. But that is having quality tools and toys are very important, and that helps the children to grow and to master themselves. Now the next one that we'll look at is online education, which is a newer way of homeschooling. With internet becoming mainstream, everybody and everywhere basically has internet at this point. People saw an opportunity, and so with online schools, you can be a part of a school with thousands of other people, but you don't have to be there. Online education offers some schools that are public schools, some schools that are private schools, and even a myriad of everything in between. So there are online homeschool group co-ops, that you can join that are just like a co-op that you would go to maybe on Tuesday and spend at local church learning whatever is being taught. Now it's online, so you have thousands of children from across the country that are all getting together. And it doesn't matter if you live 5 minutes from a co-op or 150 miles from a co-op, you can join in and get the same benefits. Now, online education, some courses are recorded, just like we're doing here, or some of them are live and interactive. There's a whole spectrum of what constitutes online education. For the most part, it is schooling online, where the class is taught in some way over the technology of the internet, and children log in, students I should say, to learn what they need to learn. There are areas, there are several states, and even some towns where now all of their public school is online. But you would I would recommend, if you're thinking of doing online education at all, to check and see if your state has public online education, because you may be able to enroll in even just 1 or 2 courses. You may be able to get a complete schooling online. Some online meets every single day and it's live. Sometimes it's just that you log in and they tell you what to do, and then you go off for the other 4 days and your mom is actually your teacher, or you have set projects that you're doing. So if you're even considering that, or if you're worried about, when we were talking about last time, how will I do chemistry and algebra? Well, you can do it online. It's no longer an issue, even if you don't have access to a community college or you are not well versed in those subjects. There's nothing stopping you from accredited schools to online colleges to even things like Udemy and Teachable, where you can just learn whatever you need. Online education opens millions of doors and can be used really with any of the approaches, just to fill in the gaps that you need to fill in. So the next is the Waldorf education. And this one, I know some about Waldorf, and what I know is that I always like the toys when I see them. But just like Montessori, it's much more than just the toys. That's what they've become known for, but that really isn't the whole philosophy. Waldorf education began in Germany, and it's rooted, it was actually a system developed by Rudolf Steiner in the early part of the 20th century. So that is, again, contemporary to Montessori and Mason. At that point, there were all these philosophies coming out about education as people were beginning to wonder, how did children learn? And compulsory education was becoming the norm. So although it was founded by Rudolf Steiner, it's named Waldorf, which is actually after the area where it was founded, where they used to meet. And this was an immensely popular philosophy of education in Europe in the early 20th century. However, when World War II hit, the Nazi occupation throughout Europe closed virtually every Waldorf school that there was. And it's just now starting to take root again in Europe. Thankfully, there were some that grew in popularity in North America, and so that kept the philosophy alive. And now from North America, it is actually spreading back to Europe and taking hold. So the Waldorf education is a holistic way of educating. It concentrates very much on the whole child, on the feelings and the knowledge and the physical, as well as how the child relates to nature. It's very grounded in natural rhythms and nature education. So in that way, it has some connection with Charlotte Mason, which with having a focus on nature and the importance of understanding nature and being a part of nature. So one of the quintessential pieces of the Waldorf method, if you know anything about it, or if you want to know, is what they call the nature table. The nature table is a way to bring the nature inside for the child and also showcase what they have found. It changes with the season and the month and the rhythms of the earth, and it's a way for the child to taste, touch, taste, learn, use all their senses to become engrossed in the natural world and how it works. So because of this, Waldorf materials and tools are generally made from, are handmade from natural materials. They are not mass produced. They are not made out of plastic, because Waldorf was a stark opposition to the Industrial Revolution. And Waldorf method was seen as a way to fight the dehumanization that came from industrialization and the mechanical production of everything. They were fighting against people being stuck in factories for hours on end, working on an assembly line. So that's why Waldorf toys are still very expensive, whereas Montessori, you may be able to find ones that are produced a little bit more cheaply. Waldorf materials are all still handmade by artisans with natural fibers, which is why, if you've ever seen Waldorf toys, that's why they're so appealing, because they're beautiful, they're amazingly crafted, and you just want to take them and bring them home because they'll last for generations. The last thing that I want to say is that artistic talent and emotional health are two of the main goals of Waldorf education. So it has a little bit of the Montessori, that it does lend itself to child-led activities, and it does overlap with Charlotte Mason, bringing in the natural world and nurturing the artists, the arts. But it is its own philosophy, that it's a very holistic look, and there are varying degrees of how this works. But if you are interested in Waldorf, again, there are some amazing groups on Facebook that could explain it much better than I did, because I know what it is, but I'm not practicing it. So it is a philosophy and it's a way of life. People that follow Waldorf generally don't have plastic in their home at all. That's not to say that you can't own any plastic, but there are Waldorf schools that if you are a member of that school, like a private school, you're not allowed to own any plastic, you're not allowed to own any technology. So it really is a philosophy for life, not just education. Okay, so unit study homeschooling is what I'm going to look at next. A unit study is basically a study that encompasses everything that you need to learn on one topic. So a unit study can be used if you just need a diversion. Let's say you're doing textbook learning, you're doing classical education, whatever it is, but you want to take a little bit of a break from the rigors of what you're doing, but you don't want to stop school and have the kids go off the rails. So you can do a unit study. It can be a short unit study that only takes a week. It can be an entire year, and that is your whole education, is this unit study on whatever topic. So a classic example of this is the Prairie Primer. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but once you've been in homeschool circles for a while, you'll definitely hear of the Prairie Primer. The Prairie Primer is a book about this book, and it is based on the Little House books by Laura Ingalls Wilder. In it, it teaches, I believe it's second to third grade level. It teaches you everything from reading and spelling, geography, history. Everything is based on the stories of the Little House and on accompanying projects that you use to learn. So even your spelling words, your handwriting, your science, your history is all connected to the Little House book. You're going to study everything around that time period, those people, those places. In a unit study, every subject is taught in relation to the central topic, just as I said. So for instance, a unit study in space, let's say it's space for your topic, because that lends itself to a whole lot of studying. Could include a scientific study of space. That's easy. Reading literature set in space. So maybe you're reading sci-fi that takes place in space. Practicing writing space words for handwriting or copyright work. Word problems and math problems that are space themed. Creating space-based arts. Maybe you're painting the planet, or you're painting a comet, or sculpting something. Hands-on space study projects. Unit studies are heavily hands-on based, and that is generally the way that they culminate. So you study everything, and then you do a hands-on activity or assessment to wrap up what you have studied. Studying the history of space exploration, learning space vocabulary in the target language. So even if you are studying a foreign language, you may be learning Spanish, but all of your vocabulary and discussions are going to be about space. And you can do that in English as well. And writing stories and essays about space. So if you look at all of those, really, you could spend an entire year. If your child is very interested in space, this could be their study for the year. I remember when I was actually a public school teacher, a young boy came in who was homeschooled from the area, and he wanted to teach the children about space. He had been to space camp, I believe, like 3 times, and he was only in maybe 4th or 5th grade. He was still young. I would say around 9 or 10 years old. He had made himself a whole outfit that looked like an astronaut. So he could tell you all about the different parts of the rocket, I guess at that point it was a space shuttle. And so he did an entire presentation for the children about space. He brought in different projects that he had made, and that had been his study for the year, possibly longer, because he just loved space. And so he was learning everything connected to his passion. That's why this can be a great option, especially if you have children who are struggling, that you can take something that is their passion, and now you take school and you put it where they most want to be. And it makes the school year much more bearable, because now they're very excited. They're learning and they don't realize that they're learning. There are people that do complete unit study schooling for all of the years. It is teacher intensive. I think that it's a great tool and a great way to learn, but I think that it can sometimes be difficult to maintain the inertia and to keep going through it. So it definitely is an option if you want to take a break for a year or a couple weeks or a month, or it is if you're saying, this is what I want to do. I want my kids to just follow their passion and learn everything that they can that way, then that can be your method of education. And there are pre-made curriculums that you can buy that are unit study based. So it isn't that you need to create everything yourself. You're not always recreating the wheel. That is a possibility. And if you just Google unit study homeschool, you will find an awful lot. It is a great change of pace, but it's still well-rounded and complete. So there's no worry about missing out on anything. Unlike unschooling, where you follow your passion, you might be worried, well, is my child going to study enough of this and that? With the unit study, it is planned out, and so they're still studying their passion, but it's a more structured way. So I feel like it kind of marries the two together. Okay. There are two more that I'd like to talk about, and they are ones that are really gaining they're gaining ground because our workforce and the way we live is changing with this digital age. So the two that I would like to speak about now are road schooling and world schooling, and really they're basically the same thing, just different way of handling it. So road schooling is generally that the family travels, possibly full-time, around the country in their RV, in their van, however they're traveling. And they learn from the different places that they go to. There may be some textbooks involved in that. You could maybe have a math book, or you could have a history book. But the idea is that you go around and learn from what you're actually experiencing. So you're not just reading about the Grand Canyon, you're going to the Grand Canyon and hiking there. The road schooling is becoming more of an option, because it used to be that something like this could only happen if you were fairly wealthy and could afford to just travel around and not work. Or sometimes people would take their road schooling year and just take a sabbatical and travel around. But now with the internet and people being able to be digital nomads, this is more of an option, because parents can work from their hotspots or from internet cafes and keep the money coming in and just travel around full time. So road schooling, that is in a nutshell, but they can overlap with other philosophies depending on how you want to school your child. Obviously, you may want to pull in things other than just driving around, or you may want to do the short term or long term. But road schooling generally is that you are being educated by traveling by a vehicle on the road around wherever you can drive. World schooling, on the other hand, is generally the same thing, that you're learning through travel and experience, but you are traveling the world. So you may be going by car, but you're also going by boat and plane and train to all different places, experiencing different cultures and different languages, and learning by immersion. So most world schoolers do have some degree of proficiency in multiple languages, depending on how long they're staying in each spot and whether this is a permanent way of doing it, so you're 6 months here and a year there or whatever, or if you're just doing it short term. You're still going out and you're experiencing the world, and the world is your classroom. These are really amazing things to think about, and every once in a while I say we're just going to get an RV and take it on the road, because if you're homeschooling and you're working from home, why not just study wherever you want? But it is something that there are many groups that you can join and learn more about it and see how you can incorporate it into your own family, your own time, your own constraints to make it work for you. So the last one is considered eclectic education. I left that for last because really that's where most of homeschoolers land. You could be a diehard unschooler, a diehard Charlotte Mason, that you do everything according to the book. But from what I've experienced and what I've found with my own family is that even people that subscribe to one philosophy bring in other elements to help meet their child's needs. So if you're doing textbook education and you generally use DJU, but you're like, spelling just isn't working for Sally in second grade, you might pull out a reason for spelling and do that instead. That right there is eclectic because you are pulling in something different. If you generally like Charlotte Mason and the nature studies, the living books, the Latin, but you want science in a textbook and not just from living books because you feel like you need to have them be getting more, you can do that. That's an eclectic approach. On the other extreme of eclectic is where you pull everything from something different. And so you're just pulling in all the different philosophies, whatever works for each child, whatever works for each subject, and creating your own curriculum and your own school philosophy from what you've learned from the other places. And that, like I said, eclectic is where most homeschoolers fall, even if they don't realize it. Because once you started doing it for a while and you see what this one's doing and that one's doing, and you experience different textbooks or materials at homeschool conferences, you begin to grow and learn and adapt and bring other things into your philosophy. Now, when you're choosing the right one for you, and I'm going to work through this in the workbook and give you some exercises to do, it's important to read through them and see which ones pop out at you. And think about, well, would I be happy doing that? Because if you're not going to be happy schooling that way, if doing a Montessori approach where the child is, you're following the child and you're just going at their pace and you're providing this opportunity and that opportunity and rotating the work boxes is something that is going to drive you mad, then it's not the right philosophy for you. You need to find something that you are going to be able to manage, even if you think that is the best educational model there is. It has to be something that's going to work with you and your family and that you can keep going and not dread doing it. So when you're going through these, definitely think about that and see what stands out at you. Either there's no way I want to do that, or that sounds amazing. Take notes on those and then go and pursue those to learn more about them. So join groups. If you're looking at Charlotte Mason, read some of her books. If you're looking at Waldorf, read more about that philosophy. Connect with the road schooling family and see what it's like to live and school on the road. And just do a little bit of exploration. If you go whole hog into one and then you get a bit in and realize that this is not working for your family, or you need to change things up a little bit, that is okay. This is definitely going to be a learning curve. It's very hard just from reading through them, especially if you've never homeschooled, to know which one is going to work for you. So you are going to need to try some things out and see how it goes. Maybe you want to just take a week and do a classical approach, and take a week and do a Montessori approach, and take a week and do a unit study, and just see the difference. If those are the three that are on top of your mind, that those are going to work, and see how it works. And be willing to change. That was something that I brought up last time too, and that I'm going to talk about later, is that you need to be willing to adapt and change. That is part of homeschooling. That's what makes homeschooling superior to just being in a public school or in a private school, is that things can be adapted and changed to the needs of the child and the family. And don't be afraid to say, this isn't working for me. It's okay. So that is it for today. If you have any other questions, or if there's a philosophy that you've heard of, because believe me, there are more than just these. These are the major ones that I wanted you to be aware of, and it's at least a place to start and think about it. If there's one that you've heard of and you want to know more about it, please put that in the comments. Or if you have any questions, I plan on doing a live question and answer probably the end of this week or the beginning of next week. So please put your questions in because I have something to talk about. And I will be getting that workbook to you and work through it, see what philosophy really speaks to you. And then if you find one and you want to know more about it, we can just have a discussion about how to implement that into your house and where to start. I hope you're having a great day and a wonderful summer, and I will see you in the group soon. Bye.